In the dawn of Christianity, when the Roman Empire still dominated the known world, two holy men shared not only the same name, but also a passion for defending true love. This is the story of the Saints Valentine, beginning with the wise Bishop of Terni, whose rose garden became an eternal symbol of Christian love, and continuing with the courageous Roman priest who sealed the sanctity of marriage with his own blood. Their lives, though separated by time and distance, intertwine into a single melody of love, sacrifice, and devotion. Chapter 1. The Bishop's Garden. At dawn in Terni, the Bishop Valentine was always found in his garden, tending his precious roses with care. His hands, weathered by the years, handled each flower with the same delicacy he used to tend to matters of the soul. The episcopal garden, located in the heart of the ancient Umbrian city, had become a refuge for all those seeking counsel and comfort in matters of the heart. From his youth, Valentine had shown a special sensitivity for understanding the complexities of human love. His education in Greek philosophy and Christian theology enabled him to build bridges between ancient wisdom and the eternal truths of the gospel. The inhabitants of Terni soon discovered that their bishop possessed a unique gift, the ability to heal wounded hearts and guide enamored souls toward true love. The mornings in the episcopal garden followed an unchanging ritual. While pruning his roses, the bishop welcomed young couples and marriages in crisis, listening to their problems with infinite patience. For each situation, he had a word of wisdom and a rose that symbolized a profound truth about love. "Observe," he would say, "how this rose needs both sun and rain to bloom. So it is with love. It grows in both joy and hardship." The fame of Bishop Valentine as a marital counselor soon spread beyond the boundaries of his diocese. Couples from all over Italy traveled to Terni to receive his blessing and hear his teachings. His method was unique. Instead of lengthy sermons, he used parables inspired by nature, especially his beloved roses, to illustrate the deepest truths of Christian love. In an era when marriage was often seen merely as a social contract, Bishop Valentine stood out by defending the sacred dimension of marital love. His homilies on marriage attracted crowds, and his revolutionary teachings on the fundamental equality between husband and wife resonated especially with women, who found in his words a dignity that Roman society often denied them. Chapter 2. The Sage of the Roses. Mornings in the episcopal garden were moments of intense spiritual activity. Bishop Valentine had developed a unique method for counseling couples, using different types of roses to illustrate the various facets of love. He explained that white roses represented the purity of true love, red roses, the passion sanctified by the sacrament, and pink roses, the tenderness necessary in any relationship. For young couples seeking premarital advice, the bishop had a special practice. He asked them to tend a rosebush together for several months before their wedding. Love, like this plant, he taught, requires constant attention, patience, and dedication. It is not enough to admire the flowers, one must also be willing to handle the thorns. His wisdom was especially evident in his dealings with marriages in crisis. With infinite patience, he listened to the complaints and frustrations of both spouses, then led them into his garden to show how the most beautiful roses often grew in the harshest conditions. Adversity, he explained, is like the fertilizer for the rose. Though not pleasant, it can strengthen love when handled wisely. The reputation of the wise bishop reached Rome, attracting both nobles and commoners alike. Among his most notable visitors were philosophers and scholars, intrigued by his ability to weave together ancient wisdom and the truths of faith. His teachings on marital love incorporated elements of Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy, yet were always illuminated by the light of the gospel. Yet his deepest lessons were reserved for those intimate moments in the garden when he shared with his visitors the art of reading the roses. "Observe," he would say, "how each rose is unique, just as every love has its own story. Yet all of them, in their diversity, reflect the beauty of divine love. Chapter 3. The Teachings of the Garden. The Episcopal Garden had become a true school of Christian love. Bishop Valentine had strategically arranged different types of rose bushes, creating spaces that served as natural classrooms for his teachings. At the center of the garden, a magnificent rosebush interlacing red and white blooms symbolized the perfect union between human and divine love. The marital counseling sessions began at dawn, when the dew still sparkled on the petals. The bishop had observed that the natural beauty of the garden in the early hours of the day softened even the hardest of hearts. Couples who arrived angry with one another often found it difficult to maintain their bitterness while walking among the flowers. One of his most memorable teachings used the life cycle of the roses to illustrate the different stages of marital love. He showed couples the buds, representing nascent love, the fully bloomed roses, symbolizing the maturity of love, and even the withered roses, which taught lessons about acceptance and renewal in love. For marriages facing difficulties, the bishop had developed what he called the Path of the Roses, a tour of the garden that included 7 stations, each dedicated to an essential virtue for enduring love: patience, understanding, forgiveness, sacrifice, fidelity, hope, and renewal. At each station, a different rose served as a focal point for meditation and dialogue. His most profound teachings, however, centered on the mystery of suffering in love. Using the thorns of the roses, he explained how pain, when accepted with faith, could transform into a source of growth and strength for love. The thorns, he said, remind us that true love always involves sacrifice. Chapter 4. The Philosopher and the Garden. Among the many visitors to the Episcopal Garden, one figure stood out: Crato, a renowned Greek philosopher who had arrived in Terni accompanied by his brightest disciples. His initial visit was motivated by intellectual curiosity, having heard rumors of a bishop who combined ancient philosophy with a new understanding of love. The first encounters between Crato and Bishop Valentine took shape during long walks through the garden. The philosopher, accustomed to abstract debates in the academies of Athens, found himself fascinated by the way Valentine used tangible elements of nature to illustrate deep philosophical truths. Every rose, every thorn, every drop of dew became a living lesson about love and truth. Their conversations soon attracted a regular group of listeners. Crato's disciples mingled with the devout Christians, creating a unique atmosphere where the pursuit of wisdom and faith converged harmoniously. The Episcopal Garden transformed into a new academy where the teachings of Plato about love intertwined with the truths of the Gospel. Crato's transformation was gradual but profound. The philosopher began to see in the bishop's roses not merely symbols of abstract truths, but manifestations of a personal divine love. Discussions about ideal beauty found concrete expression in the perfection of each flower, and reflections on the highest good found their answer in the sacrificial love of Christ. The final conversion of Crato and his 3 principal disciples marked a decisive moment. The baptism was celebrated at dawn in the heart of the garden, surrounded by the fragrance of blooming roses. This event, which should have been a cause for joy, also marked the beginning of troubles that would lead to the martyrdom of the holy bishop, for the conversion of such a respected philosopher did not go unnoticed by the imperial authorities. Chapter 5. Clouds over the garden. The first signs of the impending storm arrived with the cold winds of autumn. Emperor Aurelian, concerned about the growing influence of Christianity among the empire's intellectuals, had begun to implement stricter measures against Christian leaders. The conversion of Crato and his disciples had drawn Rome's attention to the Bishop of Terni. Despite warnings from his friends, Valentine continued his ministry unaltered. His garden remained open to all who sought his counsel, and his teachings on Christian love grew even deeper and more direct. "The most fragrant roses," he now said, "are those that bloom in the shadow of the cross." The presence of imperial spies became increasingly evident in Terni. Visitors to the episcopal garden began to be interrogated, and some of the more discreet Christians started to avoid the place. However, this only seemed to strengthen the bishop's determination. Every morning, with greater dedication than ever, he tended his roses and welcomed those who sought his advice. The arrest order came on a cold February morning. Soldiers found Bishop Valentine in his garden, pruning his roses with his usual serene composure. When the officers apologized for having to arrest him, the saint replied with a smile, handing each one a rose. "May these flowers remind you that God's love blossoms even in the darkest moments." Before he was taken away, the bishop had one last moment in his beloved garden. It is said that he knelt among his roses and prayed, "Lord, may these flowers continue to bear witness to your love, and may all who come here find the same comfort and guidance that you allowed me to offer." This prayer would be remembered and repeated by generations of believers who would visit the garden in the centuries to come. Chapter 6. The Last Dawn. The journey to Rome was a 3-day ordeal, during which Bishop Valentine used every stop to share his faith with the soldiers guarding him. Many of them, moved by his serenity and wisdom, began to question the orders they were following. Even in chains, the saint continued his ministry, speaking of divine love with the same passion he had once shown in his garden. The trial was held in the Roman Forum before Emperor Aurelian himself. Crato and his disciples, risking their lives, appeared as witnesses in his defense. The philosopher spoke eloquently of how Valentine's teachings had illuminated not only his understanding of divine love, but also the truths that ancient philosophers had sought for centuries. Crato's passionate defense, however, only served to confirm the emperor's fears regarding the influence of Christianity among the intellectuals. The sentence was pronounced without hesitation. Bishop Valentine would be executed at dawn the following day on February 14th. The chosen date was no accident. The emperor wished to send a clear message to the Christian community. During his final night in the Mamertine prison cell, Valentine received a visit from a young guard whose fiancé was gravely ill. The saint, maintaining his spirit of service until the end, wrote a letter of comfort for the young woman and sent her a rose that Crato had managed to bring from his garden in Terni. Tradition holds that the young woman miraculously recovered upon receiving the rose and the letter. The dawn of February 14th found the saint in prayer. When the guards came for him, he greeted them with the same serenity he had shown throughout his captivity. His last words were a prayer for all lovers, asking that the love he and the Bishop of Terni had defended continue to bloom in the hearts of the faithful for generations to come. Chapter 7. The Echo of Martyrdom. The news of Bishop Valentine's martyrdom spread quickly throughout the empire. In Terni, his rose garden became a pilgrimage site where Christians secretly gathered to remember his teachings and seek the intercession of the saint. It was said that the roses in his garden bloomed with a special beauty, as if blessed by the martyr's own blood. Among those deeply moved by Bishop Valentine's testimony was a young Roman priest, also named Valentine. This priest, having heard the stories of the holy bishop and his teachings on Christian love, began to reflect deeply on the meaning of marriage in times of persecution. The episcopal garden in Terni, now secretly tended by the faithful, became a symbol of peaceful resistance. Young couples began the tradition of exchanging roses as a symbol of their commitment, recalling the Saint Bishop's teachings. This practice would spread beyond the Christian community, influencing Roman culture. The story of the martyred bishop reached the ears of Emperor Claudius II, Aurelian's successor, who was intrigued by reports of how a simple rose garden had become the heart of a movement of love and faith. His attempts to suppress this popular devotion only strengthened it, demonstrating the truth of the saint's words. True love blossoms even more intensely in times of adversity. The young priest Valentine of Rome, inspired by the example of the martyred bishop, began to develop his own ministry focused on defending Christian marriage. Although his methods were different, he shared the same fundamental conviction that true love, blessed by God, deserved to be protected and celebrated, no matter the cost. Chapter 8. The New Valentine. In the catacombs of Rome, where Christians gathered in secret, the young priest Valentine listened attentively to the stories of the holy Bishop of Terni. The narratives about the Rose Garden and the teachings on Christian love had reached the empire's capital, inspiring a new generation of believers. For the young priest, these stories were not mere tales of the past, but a call to action. Father Valentine's ministry began to take shape amid new persecutions. Emperor Claudius II, facing threats along the empire's borders, had issued a decree forbidding marriage among young soldiers. This decision, though motivated by military reasons, represented a direct attack on the Christian conception of marriage as a divine sacrament. In his secret homilies, Father Valentine began to weave together the teachings of the martyred bishop with his own understanding of Christian love. If the bishop had used the roses of his garden to teach about love, the young priest found his symbols in the paintings and emblems of the catacombs, where images of doves, fish, and vines spoke of Christ's eternal love for his church. The reputation of the Roman priest grew among the Christian community, especially among soldiers and their betrothed. Unlike the Bishop of Terni, who had created an open garden for all, Father Valentine developed a secret network of Christian households where he could meet with couples seeking the sacrament of marriage. Each meeting place had its own sign, a discreetly drawn rose on the door. Soon, Father Valentine's ministry became a beacon of hope for young lovers facing imperial prohibition. Although he could not offer a physical garden like his predecessor, he created sacred spaces in the homes of the faithful, where love could flourish even in the midst of persecution. Chapter 9. Marriages in the Shadows. The matrimonial ceremonies celebrated by Father Valentine took place in the darkest hours of the night. In small rooms illuminated only by candlelight, enamored couples were united in marriage under God's blessing. Although there were no fresh roses as in Terni's garden, the priest had adopted the practice of drawing a rose on every marriage certificate he delivered to the couples. To protect both the couples and himself, Father Valentine devised an elaborate system of communication. Christians in Rome left coded messages in various parts of the city, using symbols that only the initiated could understand. A rose carved into a wall, a particular mark on a fountain, or a certain pattern of stones on the ground. Each sign held its specific meaning. The most notable aspect of his ministry was the way he combined the celebration of the sacrament with the spiritual formation of the couples. Before each ceremony, he dedicated time to teaching the betrothed about the profound meaning of Christian marriage. His words evoked the teachings of the Bishop of Terni, though adapted to the particular circumstances of persecution in Rome. During these preparatory sessions, Father Valentine spoke to the couples about the three roses of Christian love: the white rose of purity, the red rose of sacrifice, and the golden rose of eternal fidelity. Though he could not show them actual flowers as the bishop did in his garden, his words painted vivid images in the minds and hearts of his listeners. Every marriage he celebrated was an act of peaceful resistance against the injustice of the imperial decree. Father Valentine knew that each ceremony increased the risk of being discovered, but like his predecessor in Terni, he believed that true love was worth defending at any cost. Chapter 10. The Warden's Daughter. Father Valentine was arrested during a matrimonial ceremony. Soldiers burst into the house where the sacrament was being celebrated, but the priest, maintaining his composure, managed to ensure that the young couple escaped while he faced the authorities. His calm demeanor at the moment of arrest even impressed the soldiers, who treated him with unusual respect as they escorted him to the Mamertine prison. In prison, Valentine was placed under the custody of Asterius, the chief warden. This man, known for his harshness, had a daughter who had been born blind. The young woman, curious about the presence of the new prisoner of whom everyone spoke, began to visit Valentine's cell. Their conversations soon turned into lessons about faith, love, and hope. Recalling the teachings of the Bishop of Terni about the power of love to illuminate darkness, the priest spoke to the young woman about the inner light that overcomes any physical darkness. He described the roses from the episcopal garden of Terni with such vividness that the girl could almost see them in her imagination. Their talks became a ray of light in the gloom of the prison. One day, while sharing one of these conversations, Valentine felt divine inspiration. Placing his hands over the girl's eyes, he prayed fervently, asking God to manifest his power through the love he had defended even in captivity. At that moment, a miracle occurred. The young woman regained her sight, seeing for the first time the face of the priest who had taught her so much about God's love. The news of the miracle spread quickly throughout the prison. Asterius, witnessing the transformation in his daughter, fell to his knees before Valentine and asked to be instructed in the Christian faith. In the following days, the warden and his entire family, including the servants in his household, were baptized. The prison cell had become a new garden where faith blossomed. Chapter 11. The Last Letter. The conversion of Asterius and his family did not go unnoticed by the imperial authorities. Emperor Claudius II, who had expected that the imprisonment would silence the priest, found that his influence continued to grow even within the prison. The execution order was signed promptly, setting the date for February 14th, the same day, years earlier, that Bishop Valentine of Terni had been martyred. On his final night, Valentine requested materials to write a letter. With calm hands, he composed a message to Asterius's daughter, thanking her for her faith and reminding her that the light of God's love, now visible to her physical eyes, was only a reflection of the eternal love that had always existed in her heart. He signed the letter, "From your Valentine," a phrase that would resonate through the centuries. As he wrote, the priest reflected on how his life had followed a path parallel to that of the holy Bishop of Terni. Both had defended true love in times of persecution. Both had found ways to make faith bloom in the most unlikely places, and now both would share the same date of martyrdom. In his letter, he made reference to the bishop's rose garden, writing that every act of true love added a new rose to God's eternal garden. On the morning of his execution, Valentine handed the letter to Asterius, along with a small drawing of a rose that he had sketched at the end of his message. He asked the warden to continue the tradition of both Valentines. "May this drawn rose remind you that true love, like the roses of Terni, can bloom even in the darkest prison." The dawn of February 14th found the priest in deep prayer. When the guards came for him, he greeted them with the same serenity he had shown throughout his captivity. His last words were a prayer for all lovers, asking that the love he and the Bishop of Terni had defended continue to bloom in the hearts of the faithful for generations to come. Chapter 12. A Legacy of Eternal Love. Over the centuries, the stories of the two Saints Valentine became intertwined in the memory of the Church as a single powerful testimony to Christian love. The rose garden of the Bishop of Terni and the secret letters of the Roman priest merged into one sacred symbol of love that would transcend cultures and generations. The coincidence of their martyrdoms on the same day was not seen as accidental by the early Christians. In that synchrony, they found deep meaning. February 14th came to be a date that celebrated not only the martyrdom of two saints, but the victory of true love over persecution and death. Christians began commemorating the day by exchanging roses and messages of love, combining the traditions of both saints. The teachings of the two Valentines complemented one another perfectly. The bishop had used his garden to reveal the visible beauty of divine love, while the priest had found ways to nurture that same love in the darkness of catacombs and prisons. Together, their lives taught that true love can flourish under any circumstances, whether in a sunlit garden or in the deepest darkness. Their parallel stories offered hope for various situations. Bishop Valentine inspired those who could openly express their love, teaching them to cultivate it with wisdom and patience, while Father Valentine became the patron of those who had to keep their love alive under adverse conditions. United, they reminded the faithful that true love always finds its way. The tradition of roses and love letters, born from their different ministries, evolved into a universal language of love. Every rose gifted on St. Valentine's Day recalled the bishop's garden, and every loving message evoked the last letter of the holy priest. Thus, their legacy continued to bloom through the centuries, reminding the world that true love is both visible and invisible, both public and intimate. Chapter 13. Miracles and Favors of the Saints Valentine. Throughout the centuries, the faithful have experienced numerous miracles and favors attributed to the joint intercession of the Saints Valentine. Among the most notable is the miracle of the midnight roses, which occurred in the 16th century in Terni, when the garden once belonging to the holy bishop suddenly burst into bloom in the middle of winter, on the night a young couple prayed for their forbidden love. At dawn, they found the garden covered with fresh roses, and their families, moved by the wonder, blessed their union. Miraculous healings are also abundant in recorded testimonies. A particular pattern emerges in cases of restored sight, echoing both the original miracle performed by Father Valentine with the warden's daughter and the bishop's teachings about seeing with the eyes of the heart. One especially moving case was documented in 1823 when a young blind woman regained her sight while holding a rose from Terni's garden and reading with her fingers an ancient copy of the holy priest's last letter. The Saints Valentine have also manifested as special intercessors for couples in difficulty. Church archives hold countless testimonies of marriages on the brink of collapse that found reconciliation after visiting the sacred sites associated with the two martyrs. A particularly notable case occurred in 1947, when a marriage separated by war was miraculously reunited after both spouses, unbeknownst to each other, had been praying to the Saints Valentine at different shrines. The intercession of the saints has often manifested through signs related to their characteristic symbols. Many devotees report experiences of roses appearing inexplicably at crucial moments in their lives, or important letters arriving just when needed. These signs typically combine elements of both saints: the rose and the written word, the garden and the secret message, the visible beauty and the invisible love. But perhaps the most significant miracle is the inner transformation experienced by those who turn to the Saints Valentine. Numerous testimonies speak of how meditation on their lives and joint intercession has helped people to more deeply understand the meaning of true love. As one devotee said, "Through the bishop we learn to cultivate love with patience. Through the priest we learn to defend it with courage." Ernest chapter 14. Prayer to the Saints Valentine. O glorious Saints Valentine, gardeners of divine love and witnesses of faith unto martyrdom, who through your lives taught us the beauty and value of true love, you, wise Bishop of Terni, who in your rose garden showed us how love requires care and patience to bloom, teach us to cultivate love with the same dedication you give to your flowers. And you, courageous Roman priest, who in the darkness of persecution kept the flame of sacred love alive, help us to be steadfast in trials and to find light amid the shadows. United in the same day of martyrdom, you showed us that true love is stronger than death itself. May your example inspire us to defend sacred love in our own times and places. Intercede for the lovers, that like the roses of Tourney, their love may blossom in beauty, and for those who suffer, that like the letters written in prison, they may find hope in divine love. May every rose be a reminder of the beauty of sacrificial love, and every tender message speak to us of God's eternal love. Guide us on the path of true love until it fully blooms in the eternal garden of heaven. Amen.